Hello everybody and welcome. Sit back, relax and get ready to learn. My name is William Morrison. I'm your British Marxist-Leninist and anti-imperialist comrade, and this is part 2 of my series on the Green Book by Muammar al-Gaddafi. I've already done episode 1, which was on the instruments of government, and this part 2 will be reading and discussing section 2, which is Parliaments by Muammar Gaddafi. Like I've already explained in the previous video, but just for those who are new and unaware of the format, what I do is I read out, there's 28 points that Muammar Gaddafi makes in the Green Book. I'm going to do a video on each point. So it's very short reads per video, maybe 10 to 15 minutes a video. I'm going to read the passage per point, and then I'm going to just read out some of my own notes that I've made from reading. I hope it's informative. And hopefully by the end of the year, we will have finished the Green Book, or even a long time before the new year. In the next couple of months, we will have completed the Green Book by Muammar al-Gaddafi. So yeah, I read the passage, then I talk about it, and really the main thing behind it is that we learn, and we learn together. And I hope that regardless of your opinion on me, you find this useful and you learn something, especially about Arab socialism and Baathism. So if you haven't checked out my first video yet, which is on the instruments of government, I highly recommend you start off there, just so it's like you're reading the book in order, you're reading the points in order. But you don't really have to, that's optional. You can just cherry pick what parts of and what videos you think you will find interesting. As I make more videos, that is also completely fine. These videos I hope to be short, so I'm just going to jump straight into it. So this is part 2, and it's called Parliaments. Parliaments are the backbone of that conventional democracy prevailing in the world today. Parliament is a misrepresentation of the people. A parliamentary system and parliamentary systems are a false solution to the problem of democracy. A parliament is originally founded to represent the people, but this in itself is undemocratic, as democracy means the authority of the people and not an authority acting on the behalf of the people. The mere existence of a parliament means the absence of the people. True democracy exists only through the direct participation of the people, and not through the activity of the representatives. Parliament has been a legal barrier between the people and an exercise of authority, excluding the masses from meaningful politics and monopolising sovereignty. In their place, people are left with only a facade of democracy, manifested in long queues to cast their election ballots. To lay bare the character of parliaments, one has to examine their origin. They are either elected from constituencies, a party or a coalition of parties, or are appointed. But all of these procedures are undemocratic, for dividing the population into constituencies means that one member of parliament represents thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people, depending on the size of the population. It also means that a member keeps fewer popular organisational links with the electors, since he, like other members, is considered a representative of the whole people. This is what the prevailing traditional democracy requires. The masses are completely isolated from the representative, and he, in turn, is totally removed from them. Immediately after winning the electors' vote, the representative takes over the people's sovereignty and acts on their behalf. The prevailing traditional democracy endows the member of parliament with a sacredness and immunity which are denied to the rest of the people. Parliaments, therefore, have become a means of plundering and usurping the authority of the people. It has thus become the right of the people to struggle through popular revolution to destroy such instruments. The so-called parliamentary assemblies which usurp democracy and sovereignty, and which stifle the will of the people. The masses have the right to proclaim reverberantly the new principle, no representation in lieu of the people. If parliament is formed from one party as a result of its winning an election, it becomes a parliament of the winning party and not of the people. It represents the party and not the people, and the executive power of the parliament becomes that of the victorious party and not of the people. The same is true of the parliament of proportional representation, in which each party holds a number of seats proportional to their success in the popular vote. The members of the parliament represent the respective parties and not of the people. and the power established by such a coalition is the power of the combined parties and not that of the people. Under such systems, the people are the victims whose vote are vied for by exploitative competing factions who dupe the people into political circuses that are outwardly noisy and frantic, but inwardly powerless and irrelevant. Alternatively, the people are seduced into standing in long, apathetic, silent queues to cast their ballots in the same way that they throw waste paper into dustbins. This is the traditional democracy prevailing the world today. Whether it is represented by one party, two parties, multi-party, or non-party system. Thus, it is clear that representation is a fraud. Moreover, since the system of elected parliaments is based on propaganda to win votes, it is a demagogic system in the real sense of the word. Votes can be bought and falsified, poor people are unable to compete in the election campaigns, and the result is that only the rich get elected. Assemblies constituted by appointment or hereditary succession do not fall under the form of democracy. Philosophers, thinkers, and writers advocated the theory of representative parliaments at a time when peoples were unconsciously herded like sheep by kings, sultans, and conquerors. The ultimate aspiration of the people of those times was to have someone to represent them before such rulers. When even this aspiration was rejected, people waged bitter and protracted struggle to attain this goal. After the successful establishment of the age of the republics and the beginning of the era of the masses, it is unthinkable that democracy should mean the electing of only a few representatives to act on behalf of great masses. This is an obsolete structure. Authority must be in the hands of all the people. The most tyrannical dictatorships the world has known have existed under the ages of parliaments. So, comrades, we just read part 2 of our 28-point Green Book by Muammar Gaddafi. We read the section on parliaments. So this passage that I just read out was essentially Gaddafi's view on parliaments. He clearly sees them as institutions of equality and institutions of oppression against the masses of the people. So there's a few points that I've made here that I'd like to address. This video maybe will be finished in about at the 15-minute mark, hopefully. So first of all, he defines what he thinks democracy is, where he says that democracy means the authority of the people and not an authority acting on their behalf. So this is a very pro-direct democracy stance. He clearly has a very strong aversion to representative democracy, and obviously he has multiple reasons for this in this passage, which I'll highlight and which has already been highlighted. So he defines democracy as the authority of the people. So a representative small body of people representing the masses, in his opinion, is not a real democracy. So that is an interesting point. And back in the 1960s and 70s, when this was written, that was quite a radical idea. Like he said, the traditional prevailing parliaments of the world were representative liberal democracies. So this was quite radical back then. Nowadays, I think most people would actually agree with him that direct democracy is more fair, as more power is in the hands of the actual people. So he defines authority as he defines democracy as the authority of the people. So he has a strong aversion to representative democracy. His idea of democracy is that of a transparent and pure system where the people have real power. Also, he further critiques representative democracy further on, just a little bit further along. He calls it a legal barrier, and he said that it excludes the masses from meaningful politics and monopolising sovereignty. He is literally saying that parliaments are holding back progress for the people of a country. They hold back progress for the most exploited people. Most people are excluded from any real decision-making skills. And yes, it is a legal barrier. It's a barrier that keeps people cattled like sheep, essentially. That is his opinion on representative democracy. Furthermore, he raises a good point, which I actually want to have some examples for. So this was written obviously a few decades ago, quite a few decades ago. But even nowadays, with contemporary political unions, I can think of some examples. He says that proportional representation or parliaments divide the population into constituencies, meaning that one member of parliament represents thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people, depending on the population size. Well, this is true, and that is why a lot of communists in Britain supported Britain leaving the European Union, why we voted for Brexit. The EU is an extremely undemocratic union. There is one member of European Parliament, so there's one MEP for every 500,000 people. To think that one person can represent accurately 500,000 people is utopian and completely pseudoscientific and absolutely delusional. So, for example, Scotland has about 5.5 million people, so we had about 11 members of the European Parliament. 11 people represented a nation of 5.5 million people. That was never going to work. The people of Scotland were never going to be represented. Just completely. I am not sure how many British MEPs. Obviously, I am from a British perspective. I'm not sure how many MEPs we have or had, but it wasn't a lot to represent 70 million people. Just divide that by 500,000. So it's completely unfair. And even in constituencies, he also mentions constituencies. Again, in the UK, constituencies are unevenly disparate. So here in Dundee is a city of about 150,000 people, and Dundee at UK general elections are split up into two constituencies. We have Dundee West and Dundee East, which means that the constituency that is represented my representative lives in represents 75,000 people. It's a little bit more consolidated than the EU, but it's certainly not fair how one person can represent accurately 75,000 people who are all completely different, who represent completely different class interests, have different races and languages and religions and worships and faith. It's absolutely ludicrous to suggest that one person can accurately represent everyone. And the first past the post system in Britain proves that you don't even need a majority to win an election. You can win an election with more people voting against you and your party than actually voted for you. That is a thing that happens in Britain quite frequently. In fact, I think in 2018, only 37% of the electorate voted for the Conservative parties. However, just because of how the first past the post system works, they won a majority of seats in Parliament. So that is why Gaddafi, that's some examples that Gaddafi was leading to, of the flaws of representative democracy. Furthermore, he says that the masses are completely isolated from the representative. They are removed from them. He is removed from them. So this just shows, again, that he thinks that representative democracy is not inclusive, and it isolates the masses from the representative body, and that over time the representative body and the masses become separated from each other. They become completely divorced from each other, where the representative body doesn't really understand the issues facing the masses, the voters in society. And this is true even in my constituency. My constituency is under the SNP, the Scottish National Party, which is an extremely racist right-wing party, and Chris Law is my MP. He recently bought a castle with taxpayers' money. He is the kind of person that claims the maximum of expenses on top of his £80,000 a year salary. He also claims about £150,000 in expenses. And because of the immense wealth that he has now, and because of how divorced and separated he has become from his voters, he thought he had the audacity, and he thought it was perfectly okay to buy a castle. So the constituency that represents Dundee, a very poor, quite backwards, very industrial city. There's lots of workers here. There's lots of poverty. There's lots of addiction. In fact, Dundee is the drug death capital of Europe. If you didn't know that for a fact, Dundee is the drug death capital of Europe. And our MP, our Member of Parliament, thinks that it's okay to buy a castle. Yeah, very representative of the people of Dundee. Anyway, so the reasons that he has to criticise representative democracy, he sees as a justification to struggle against it and struggle for the dismantling of representative liberal democracies. He says that the plundering and usurping of the authority of the people, it has become the right of the people to struggle through popular revolution to destroy such instruments. So of course, these are instruments of oppression. They oppress the masses. They exclude the masses, they isolate the masses, and it's actually a part of class antagonism, if you want to add some class analysis into this. The existence of parliament is to antagonise the classes. The voters vote for the bourgeoisie, voters who are mostly proletariat, and that carves an even harsher divide in society. Sorry, Kermit, my throat's getting sore. I'm just going to sip on some. I'm going to have a whiskey old-fashioned here. So he sees these reasons, the weaknesses and flaws of representative democracy. He sees that these are all justifications to struggle against it and to fight for its dismantling, to fight for its abolition. Furthermore, where are we now? Here we are. The members of the parliament represent their respective parties and not the people. So this shows that Gaddafi believes that representative democracy, a characteristic of representative democracy, is where the masses are used merely as a tool to strengthen our own oppression against us. It's quite a barbaric world we're living in, where this makes sense. This idea is not seen as a radical idea anymore. This is quite normalized. Most people agree with this. If I was to use this quote, this following quote, most people, if I didn't attribute to Gaddafi, most people would agree with it. It says, under such systems, the people are the victims, whose votes are vied for by exploitative competing factions who dupe the people into political circuses that are outwardly noisy and frantic, but inwardly powerless and irrelevant. The masses, the poor, downtrodden masses, are merely tools of political parties and the political elite to further strengthen their own oppression against themselves. Because we are voting for class enemies. That is what democracy is. That is what liberal democracy is in Western societies. It's where poor, downtrodden, oppressed and exploited people vote to further their exploitation, oppression, downtroddenness and poverty. That is essentially what Gaddafi is saying here, and that is something that I very, very strongly agree with, actually. It's true. Liberal democracy has provided us nothing good, I don't think. It's a shambles. It's class antagonistic. Again, I'm going to lead on to this. My next point is a good props to Gaddafi for providing class analysis. He says here that, moreover, since the system of elected parliament is based on propaganda to win votes, it is a demagogic system in the real sense of the word. Votes can be bought and falsified, poor people are unable to compete in the election campaigns, and the result is that only the rich get elected. Assemblies constituted by appointment or hereditary succession do not fall under any form of democracy. So this is class analysis. So a lot of people don't see or don't believe that Muammar al-Gaddafi was a communist or a Marxist, but he clearly was to an extent. In his writing, and I touched on this in the last video as well, where he also provided some dialectical material analysis. He's definitely somebody who has read Marx. He's definitely somebody that's adopted some of Marxist conclusions and analysis on things. And he does provide in this book lots of dialectical and historical material analysis and also class analysis. He actually explores quite a bit there. So here he says that in representative liberal democracies and in parliaments generally in the West, it's only the rich that win. Poor people vote for rich people to represent rich people's interests to further oppress poor people. That is the equation. That's the formula that liberal democracies follow. And it has worked for centuries. And again, he provides dialectical analysis here, where he says that philosophers, thinkers, and writers advocated for this theory of representative parliaments at a time when peoples were unconsciously herded like sheep by kings, sultans, and conquerors. This is true. It was a little bit after the ancient age of the slave empires and stuff, but it was before the era of the epoch of the republics. That time before that, where there were sultans and kings and the monarchies, and it was a very feudalistic and aristocratic time in our lives. This was when representative democracy was really tried. The monarchs, absolute monarchs and absolute dictatorial families still ruled, but there was a representative kind of body. that represented the people. And that was as far as democracy could go back then because of the material conditions and because of dialectical historical material analysis. Marxists understand why this was and why things are the way they are, because we have this as an analytical tool to understand and study the world. So yeah, I guess what Gaddafi is saying in this passage overall is that representative democracy is yet another tool of class antagonism. It divides classes even further apart. Representative liberal democracies don't help and actually worsen and exasperate the exploitation and oppression by the masses. And it furthers the interests and consolidates and strengthens the dictatorship of capital and the ruling class and their iron fist control over the rest of the people. This is what Gaddafi believed. These are the main points that have been addressed. And so yeah, I hope you found this informative, and I hope to see you in part 3 where we talk about the party. That'll be an interesting read as well. So I'll see you in the next video, comrades. Solidarity and comradeship to you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.